Guys, Coach here, and welcome to this week's episode. Most of this episode is going to be all about getting ready. Getting ready for the holidays, getting ready for winter, and taking care of what you have so that it comes back up and performs again well for you next year. In the case here at Brook and Pond, I'm going to be paying attention to the raised beds and the containers today, and especially starting with the containers. The hostas are obviously done. The dark side of the moon astilbe is obviously done. And with the cold, harsh winds we've had the past couple days, they have basically dried these containers out again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove some of the vegetation. I'm going to mulch the tops of the smaller ones with the hostas and the astilbe, and I'm going to place them underneath our big cargo trailer with a layer of mulch. I'm going to give it a little bit of a drink, and I'm going to call it good for this year. Now, as far as the beds over here, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing kind of the same thing with a couple of exceptions. The hostas are going to get cleaned, they're going to get mulched. Daylilies are going to get cleaned, they're going to get mulched. The lemon coral sedum, yeah, they don't go down to 0 degrees. And Maestro will show you some of the close-ups of that. They're rated for zone 7, which I believe goes down to 0 at the lower end of zone 7. And we've had a 22-degree night, and tonight we're expecting a 17. And the lemon corals, yeah, they didn't even make it to the 22-degree night. They're melted. And it's really kind of disappointing because I thought I could salvage some of them and get them through if we were to have some below 0 temperatures, which I'm sure we'll have some, and be able to get them into next year. But they're virtually almost destroyed. Everything else is doing well. Liatris is already fast asleep. The salvia are hanging in there. The annual salvia, they're melted off. I'm going to clean those up as well. Another thing that I might suggest for you is this time of year, if you haven't done it already, since we've gone to standard time, except for you out in Arizona, you're always on standard time, but check your clocks. Check your clocks for your irrigation if you're still having to irrigate, and check your lighting clocks if you happen to have them. Go to, unless you have some kind of a photocell on and off system, if you have a mechanical timer, make sure you go out there and reset it. Otherwise, you may be coming on at 8:30 at night and going off at 4 in the morning. And you probably want to shorten that down a little bit. So, with that being said, let's get going. There's a couple of schools of thought when it comes to hostas. Some people leave the wilted, dead and dying foliage right on the plant itself, and they clean it up next spring. And there's nothing wrong with that, provided you don't have any sort of diseases or bugs in and around where they grew this year. And sometimes they tend to harbor and winter over under the foliage. In our particular case here at Brook and Pond, I don't have to worry about that because it's, number one, relatively new, and number two, as far as foliage damaging insects or fungus types, bacterial types, they're not very prevalent up here in zone 4. So like I said at the opening, I'm going to clean these guys up, mulch them up with some bark, and shove them underneath the trailer. I'm probably going to end up getting some straw bales, although they're kind of few and far between where I'm at. Tractor Supply may have some, I don't know. These hostas, the Velvet Moons and the dark side of the moon astilbe, were a great combination this summer. I was a little disappointed in the little quick fire hydrangeas. They just never got any bigger. They never got any bigger than when we planted them. Now granted, we planted them in July, and their growing season was probably 60% done by then. So I hope that they kind of rebound and get a little better next year, including having a bloom or two. I like it mainly for the foliage, the larger leaf, the shade adaptivity that they have, but I thought they would have had. I just don't think they're old enough to put on any blooms just yet. They had one little dinky, almost second thought bloom, and that was it. When you're storing these guys for the winter, there's really no need for you to do any feeding or anything else. Their whole DNA is sleeping now. Sleeping and getting through the winter because we're in a container. Containers and root zones tend to get a lot colder and really test the hardiness of root zones. Even if it's your rated zone. Here in zone 4, the hostas are rated to zone 4. The Stilbea is rated to zone 3. No problem, but that's in the ground. Here, in containers, I'm going to give them a little bit of a drink. The potting soil that I used for the hostas, I was impressed with it when I used it. And I think a lot of the weed that I have in the containers probably came from the nursery stock itself. It was probably holdover stock, but you can certainly tell that they're done. You can pull those hostas out without any problem. So they're fast asleep. Now right now we're talking the second week in November. I don't know where you guys are at, but how far is fall in full swing for you guys? For you guys in like where we came from, zone 9, these guys would probably be just going to sleep or thinking about sleep. Okay, let's get a little bit of mulch. The freaking mulch this week, because of the colder temperatures, moisture freezes. It doesn't matter what it's in. And my bags of mulch are now bricks. And I had to take them out of the pile about an hour ago. But you can certainly see the tops of them especially are frozen. Up here in northern Maine where we're at, the weather this time of year is so fickle. We had 48, almost 50 degrees yesterday with rain. No, 2 days ago. And then yesterday was 37 degrees and snow. And it's all over the board. Today is cold. High only 34. Landscape probability sitting around 0. Unless you consider this landscaping. I consider it more preventative maintenance than anything else. Okay, so mulching these guys up will give that insulatory value to the crown. It won't do much for the container going downward towards the ground. That is where I'm going to have to kind of straw bale and prevent cold winds and other things. Eventually, when the snow arrives in inches, once that starts to accumulate and the snow can break wind chill and other stuff, the mulch and the containers and the straw working all together will get us through without any problem, I believe. Remember, this is my first winter with plant material here. The only thing we had last winter was the green giant arborvitae. They were on the side of the garage and we transplanted to the hillside. And they did fine. They got through. The transplanting took a little bit out of them, but they bounced back nice throughout the summer. A lot of this mulch that I'm using on the hostas and the Stilbea and stuff, I'll take off of here next spring after it thaws, and I'll just remulch the beds in places that I didn't mulch this fall. Now the containers versus in ground. In ground tends to have more insulation value because it doesn't have that cold beating on it on the side of a container. in addition, the snow that accumulates in our raised beds, that has a natural insulatory effect. So I got a question for you guys. What do you guys do with your hostas and your containerized planting material? If it's perennial type of stuff, whether it be trees, whether it be shrubbery and perennials like what I'm doing, but what do you guys do? Do you go, nah, or do you heel it in somewhere in a raised bed with straw, or what do you guys do? I'd be real curious. You should drop something below and let me know. The hydrangea is rated to zone 3, so I don't have any issue of wanting to insulate this one that much. But these are too big to fit underneath the trailer, so they're going to have to go and get straw baled insulation. And the reason I'm taking these all out of here is snow load that comes off of our steep roof. This area here last year with the undulation and hillside and very poor landscaping that was here, it was so bad I couldn't even get a snowblower up in here. All right, let's get some of these guys over in the underneath the trailer as much as I can. And I'm thinking right now I'm going to work smarter, not harder. Let's use the wheelbarrow. Well, I can feel the brittleness of that plastic pot already. I'm glad we're putting these away. Now next spring, and spring for us up here is May, I'll bring these out probably the end of April, something like that, and allow things to start thawing out. And who knows, we might totally change the layout of things next year. But for our first summer and just getting your head around the landscape, this back gravel patio area and everything went along with it worked really well for us. Low maintenance, instant, and I say instant, we didn't have to coax anything along. There was enough foliage. I sure do hope we can find some more of these pots next year though. Such a deal on them. $6 for the small ones, $8 for the large ones. They sold out in 2 weeks and they weren't getting any more. That was too bad. I would have liked to have had another large selection of them. You notice when I'm doing this, I'm trying to keep them kind of tight to each other. In the nursery industry, we called it grouping or stacking or crowding. It's kind of like if you've ever seen the penguins in Antarctica, where the guys have to stand around for months at a time guarding the eggs, and they cluster together for heat, for warmth, for protection. Those on the outside rotate in, those on the inside rotate out, preventing as much cold air in between as possible is the best way to store your containerized stuff. I'm kind of afraid if I left this stuff out here with the snow that comes down, it wouldn't be so much the plant getting destroyed, because once the snow's on top of it, there's, like I said, the insulation value in that alone. It would be the pot. They're not the biggest, thickest plastic pots you can get, but sometimes that snow can be very, very heavy when it comes off the roof. The one thing about these days, yesterday was so cold and snowy, blowing snow, not a lot of it. It was just barely a dusting, but 20 to 30 mile an hour winds, gusts over 40. Just not the kind of days that get you motivated to get outside and do this. It was slightly warmer than today. It's just something about sunshine that makes you want to get outside. And today, bluebird skies. Only a high of 34. Dormant plants that thrive in these climates Once they're fully asleep, they don't need light necessarily. They don't need, especially container plants, you start warming up the container with radiant sunlight. Say you have a false spring in February and you have 3 or 4 days of 45-degree weather, you can trigger that root zone to start working. Maybe start pushing up a bud or two of hosta too early. But if you keep them in the freezer, so to speak, dark, cold, and bring them out when they're naturally expected to emerge, much more natural for them. If they were in the ground, they get covered by snow, they may have a little reflective light, but they're not going to have any direct sunlight. And that's not going to trigger a growth pattern. When I take them out next spring, I'll give them a good feeding, just as I start to see a little bit of emergence. Probably a dry organic, not a liquid synthetic just yet. Liquid synthetics I think are better for full-grown growing times. I like the dry, more subtle organics when they're just coming out. It's kind of like getting up from your overnight sleep and you don't feel like having a steak and baked potato breakfast. Maybe you want to have a cup of coffee and a piece of toast. That's the best analogy I could give it. Now I seriously have to think about where I'm going to put the hydrangea. So the hydrangea, like I said, is too tall to get underneath the trailer. So I'm going to put it on the south side of the bedrooms here, south side, the gable side of the building. And I'll just snug them up next to the emerald arborvitae, which are in containers, along with some lava lamp heuchera. I think it's lava lamp, pretty sure. Of all the places in the yard this time of year, that is the warmest place outside of the front driveway for us. It gets a little bit of sun and a little bit of reflective heat. Because it's the gable end, it doesn't get a lot of snow load, and I'm able to come in and snow blow or manually move it away. There's a slight slope from the edge of the house, kind of a gravel slope, and I'm just going to put a little level spot for each hydrangea and snug it right up against the emeralds. And I think that's going to work out pretty good. Tonight's our first night in the teens, and I can already feel, even though it thawed a little bit now this time of day, which is just past noon, I can feel the ground freezing up, especially out front where it's wet. It is wet concrete gravel. That's what it feels like already, which is very indicative of freeze up arriving, which is good because if it freezes up, it's much easier to snow blow and maintain driveways and stuff with gravel that's frozen up. You tend not to take and toss gravel all over the place. One of the things that I did with these containers was elevated the hydrangea. I elevated them on 2 brick high above the smaller stuff, which really gave kind of a tiered effect, and it really looked good. Really looked good. Filled up the whole wall nice. Now it's going to look like we're freaking empty back here, and we are, but okay. So for ground stuff, I'm not going to do anything really different. I'm just going to remove the main bulk of foliage off of the daylilies. Just leave like a little clump, ones that are still kind of, shall I say, attached, I guess. Something like that. Some people take and wad this up and they put it right on the crown of the plant and just leave it there. And that's fine if you get snow burdened on top, but if you melt out, you get a windy day or something and things dry out, then it's a totally different animal. That stuff dries out and blows away, and then you have kind of an exposed crown. Stella Doros here, which is a very common daylily, did really well this year, considering they were a garage sale plant. Some of them, they had a couple weeds here and there. Still have a couple weeds. Well, boy, I can see just the foliage alone, how it insulated down. The ground is not frozen yet. It's still pliable. There you go. Not really complicated. A couple of 3 inches over the top. The rest of that crown will desiccate and die down. By next spring, it'll be kind of a, it's kind of like when daffodils come up in the spring and you kind of go, oh yeah, I forgot I planted those there. They're just kind of a harbinger and a wake up that seasons are changing, and this is what you had there. If you do have weeds that are still hanging in there, and man, there's some weeds up here. Doesn't matter how cold it gets, they seem to stay green. I don't even know the names of all of them. So, hostas, daylilies, the salvia that I have up here on the top of the hill, I'm going to give just a little bit more time to. They're so damn hardy, I might just leave them for the winter. The biggest question I have is how these lupins stayed so green and so lush all summer long. Normally lupin kind of dry out and kind of go by the wayside a little bit after they bloomed. Not these. This one here probably quintupled in size, and we brought these up from seed. These two did really good. This one here had part of it die off, and that's all that's remaining on it. But I want to try to grow more of these next year. Anyway, that's what I have for you this week. Think about it. Containers need insulation. In the ground, could get by with just mulching over it with straw or bark or anything, compost, a thick compost layer. If you do have shrubs and trees that are right on the border of your growing zone, and what I mean is they're hardy to zone 7 and you're in zone 6, take an extra precaution or two, maybe get some frost blanket or some burlap and then mulch around the root zone and the bottom of the burlap or frost blanket. Give it that extra protection and it'll probably ensure success the following year. If you guys have any questions, drop them in below. If you want to email me with a question directly, youryardcoach@gmail.com. Don't forget the website, guys. I'll catch you next week. I hope your fall is just going right along. Don't forget some of the fall chores. I'll catch you next week. Bye for now.